KayaFM podcast.
It is Africa Month, and as we approach Africa Day, we are here at KayaFM focusing on issues affecting Africa, and we've really given it quite a widespread focus. So we can look at arts and culture, we can look at all sorts of things. And here's an area I feel that is somewhat neglected. Certainly it's an area that I, until recently, knew very little about: the politics of Morocco occupying Western Sahara. There has been, in 1975, a judgment, an opinion of the International Court of Justice, which said that Morocco has no valid claim to Western Sahara, yet it has been occupying the territory for the past 40 years. And a person who's been very involved as an activist on the plight of the people living in Western Sahara joins me in the studio. Her name is Constantinides. If you follow her on social media, you will know the extent of her involvement. And she's returned, Catherine, from, is it your fifth trip to Western Sahara?
That's correct. This is my fifth trip to the refugee camps.
The refugee camps is
yes.
What have you found? Tell us about your latest experiences there.
So the last trip that I've just come back from, the humanitarian crisis in the refugee camps continues to escalate. And that is because the refugees, the Sahrawi refugees, are living in unlivable land in the middle of the Sahara Desert. The weather is extreme, so it's either extremely cold, they're now going into summer, so the temperatures are really starting to soar. Last week it hit around 42 degrees. This is only the beginning of summer. And it's important to know that humanitarian aid is the only thing that the Sahrawi refugees get in order to get by. So that's food aid and water. They have no access to safe, clean drinking water. It comes in by truck. Their food comes in by aid. They can't grow nutritious vegetables. They are some projects now to look at growing vegetables hydroponically, but the state of affairs is chronic, and they have been forgotten in the middle of the desert for 42 years.
And I'm wondering why that's been the case. What pressure, international pressure, is ever put on Morocco to withdraw, given that there has been this opinion by the International Court that says this is an illegal occupation?
The very sad thing is, and why this is forgotten, why this is not spoken about, is because there is a ceasefire. Because blood is not being spilt in the region, the world's media is not there. And secondly, there's no political will to change the status quo, because Morocco gains an immense amount from the plunder of the natural resources, and it all goes back to the natural resources of Western Sahara by a people, that have been easy to occupy because they're such a small nation. And so since 1975, when the war broke out, half of the Sahrawis fled through the only border that was available, which was into Algeria, where the Sahrawi refugee camps now are. And the others got stuck in the occupied territory, and they are now still stuck under this illegal occupation. But if you listen to the stories, and if you actually we don't know what we don't know. And that is the most important thing we can take away from Africa Month, and highlighting certain causes. But we have no idea what is going on our continent. We are only consumed by what is told to us by mainstream media. We don't scratch at the surface of what is going on across the continent, and we need to do more homework. We need to be more invested in what is happening. The human rights abuses on a daily basis, the torture being suffered by the Sahrawis in the occupied territory by Morocco is absolutely inhumane and unacceptable in this day and age where we have access to information.
Tell me about this plunder of the natural resources. What, for example, is happening? What are the Moroccans doing?
So one needs to know that Western Sahara is the richest resource of phosphates on earth. So because of the natural phosphates in Western Sahara, Morocco is illegally trading these phosphates. There was a huge case that actually happened and went through our high courts recently, and that was because there was a ship that was caught in our docks in Port Elizabeth. It was a ship called the Cherry Blossom, and the Cherry Blossom had phosphates that were illegally being moved by Morocco coming from Western Sahara. There's footage. There's an amazing organization in Norway called Western Sahara Research Watch, and they are able to track all of the shipments moving out of the occupied territory. So it's phosphates, and so phosphate is the biggest movement, and it's a huge billion-dollar industry for Morocco. So they are getting complete compensation for something that the Sahrawi people have got absolutely no no gain over. And also the second thing is that they're growing vegetables in Western Sahara and selling those into the European Union. And there has now been a ruling by the EU Court of Justice saying that Morocco is no longer allowed to trade with the European Union if the produce comes from Western Sahara.
Okay, well, that's a bit of a start, I suppose, in putting pressure on Morocco. Try and turn off the taps.
Yes.
And you sent me an article yesterday about the fisheries deal with Morocco. The EU's top court saying it should be invalid because it includes the Western Sahara. So are you at least seeing from the European Union a move to draw attention to the fact that Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara is illegal?
There have been many small wins in the last 18 months, 2 years. There have been really important strides. So absolutely, the EU's stance on the fisheries, on the phosphates, as well as on the agricultural product coming from Western Sahara have been very important. They have set precedent with trading of these items anywhere else in the world as well. The court judgment from South Africa was also absolutely amazing because it actually said that the phosphates cannot move out of our docks because these phosphates do belong to the Polisario, which is the political body of Western Sahara, and they cannot be traded by Morocco. So these kinds of things are big wins for Western Sahara, a people who believe that a peaceful resolution through dialogue, discussion is the way that they will gain their rightful place back in Western Sahara with a referendum that was promised to them in 1991 that still has not surfaced.
Tell me about the United Nations role here. Is it playing any significant role in putting pressure on Morocco to withdraw?
Well, the most important thing is that this really is stuck at the level of the UN, Security Council specifically. Because of those that have permanent seats in the Security Council, such as France. France is one of the biggest allies to Morocco. So every time that this comes up, any decisions made get vetoed. And this is where it has been stuck for more than 43 years.
The veto power of France.
It's the veto power. And if you look at the economic benefits between the ally countries and Morocco, you can start to understand the political and the geopolitical influence that this all has on the Sahrawi people who are, at the end of the day, they are suffering. And Morocco has started to colonize Western Sahara so that when the referendum does get called for, the Western Sahara is occupied by more Moroccans than it is Sahrawis.
And I think the word there, colonizing, is the startling word, isn't it? That we actually do have a colony, a process of colonization still happening in Africa.
By another African country.
That's unusual. Yes. We'll continue this discussion. We're looking at the issue of Western Sahara as we focus on Africa in Africa Month. This is Africa's last colony, Western Sahara. We're talking to activist Catherine Constantinides about her work in highlighting this plight. We'll continue this discussion. It's coming up for 7:30. Let's check on traffic, news and sport.
KayaFM Podcast.
David O'Sullivan with you. It's 7:45. Catherine Constantinides is with me in the studio. I hope you were with us a little earlier. She is an activist. She's been involved with the plight of Western Sahara for the past 4 years. She's done a number of visits to the refugee camps out in that area. Morocco having what is viewed as an illegal occupation of Western Sahara. And she was sketching earlier the historical circumstances surrounding this, as well as looking at the international pressure that is being brought to bear. International pressure, such as it is, it could be ramped up quite significantly. But during the break, Catherine was telling me something quite startling about a wall that has been built by Morocco. Now, pick up on that part of the story, Catherine. What is this wall? The second biggest wall that we've got in the world?
So this is the second largest wall in the world. We all talk about Trump and his wall, but he must have got some ideas from Morocco. It is 2,700 kilometers long.
Yeah.
And it has been built to divide the Sahrawi people from the occupied territory there and those that left in the refugee camps. It has also served to not only create a space where Moroccan soldiers man this wall and make sure that Sahrawis cannot get back into the occupied territory, into their land of Western Sahara, but on either side of this wall. So firstly, it's manned every day by 120,000 Moroccan soldiers, and on either side blood, absolutely. So the resources put into making sure that this wall is manned it's really extraordinary. And what's worse than that, though, is that Morocco planted more than 7 million landmines on either side of this wall.
That is staggering. That
Yes.
we, in this day and age, we are still getting landmines being used.
Yes, so the effect of the landmines are really still, every single day, are still a huge concern to the Sahrawi people. There is an NGO in the refugee camps. It is the Landmine Association for Victims, and they seek to not only put together lists of those who have been victims of landmines, they also try to create support mechanisms for families, because once you've been affected by a landmine, you're living in a refugee camp. So you are at a huge disadvantage to start off with. To lose your limbs, not one, not two, sometimes three. Some people have lost all 4 of their limbs. Some have lost their eyesight. I've met children who have lost their eyesight at the age of 2 or 3. It is horrifying to see the effects of landmines. And because it is so far removed, we actually have no idea what those effects of landmines are. And still on our continent, we have the largest deposit of landmines in the world, and we don't even know that it's here.
You were also prior to the break, you were talking about the plundering of the resources of Western Sahara by Morocco. You were telling me as well about the export of sand.
Yes, this is a new export, a new way they have started to rape the land of Western Sahara. They have started to export the sand to European countries who are buying the sand to extend their beaches for the summer holidays, for the tourism industry. So some of the beaches along the southern European coastline are not in fact real beaches. They are fake beaches that have been created by the import of the sand, and this has also been documented and tracked by Western Sahara Research Watch, and they have been able to actually track where the sand has gone and how it's been exported. They have built the largest conveyor belt to move the sand from the desert to the port where they export the sand.
Let's talk about the humanitarian plight. You have been visiting the refugee camps, and you've just come back from your 5th visit, is that right?
Yes, the 5th visit to the camps.
Where are these camps, and describe the situation in those camps?
So the camps are on the southwest border of Algeria. They are situated there because that was the closest border that the Sahrawis had access to, and Algeria opened their borders to the Sahrawis. The camps are... The Sahrawi and the Polisario operate as a state in exile. So they, in fact, have an entire parliamentarian system that they have running from these refugee camps. They have an entire structure of leadership, and the Polisario run the entire refugee camp. It is run with the assistance of humanitarian aid from UNHRC, from World Food Programme, UN Water, and many other agencies that have come in to support these refugees. But one has to realize that these refugee camps were set up in 1975 as a temporary solution until a referendum was going to be had. And in 1991, there was a ceasefire on the promise of a referendum within 6 months. To allow the Sahrawis to vote to go back home. And none of these things happened. This temporary refugee camp is now seeing that there are Sahrawis that are living in tents in the Sahara Desert that were temporary structures. In 2015, there were torrential rains that washed away everything. These people have less than nothing to start with, and they lost their tents, they lost the small sand dwellings that they had built. And the conditions are very harsh, as I mentioned earlier. But the beautiful thing about the Sahrawi people are, firstly, the women play an important role to keep the camps running. They are, in fact, the backbone of the refugee camps. They are a Muslim nation, and they are the only Muslim nation in the world that speaks Spanish as a first language. And that is because prior to 1975, they were colonized by the Spanish, who left. And on them leaving, they signed something called the Madrid Accord, which allowed Morocco access from the south into from their south into the Western Sahara, and Mauritania to invade from the north of their country into the south of Western Sahara. This was an agreement called the Madrid Accord, signed on condition that Spain would still receive remuneration for any of the resources sold by Morocco and Mauritania during that period.
Keeping the colonial era alive.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Does Mauritania play a role in this dispute?
So Mauritania has a long time ago moved out of this issue and of this space but sadly, they sit on the fence. They are dictated to by economic trade, economic benefits of Morocco, and they make sure that they play to the tune of Morocco. They sit on the fence, so they are really much allies wherever they are needed, but they don't play a strong role. They're also quite a weak country, also a country that still sees slavery happening, and so there's very little that they can do. I must mention the work I do with the Sahrawi refugee camps. I get access through Algeria. Algeria is the strongest ally to the Western Sahara and the Polisario. The Algerian government plays such a huge role in so many of the things that they have started to do. They've started to electrify areas of the refugee camps. For nearly 4 decades, there has been no electricity. They have started to electrify certain parts, and this is an ongoing and long-term project. They have also done unbelievable things to support on an international platform. They support the Western Sahara. Therefore, there's a huge tension between Morocco and Algeria. I'm also not allowed access any longer into Morocco or into Western Sahara, the occupied territory, because I'm blacklisted by the Moroccan government.
Oh, well, it's not surprising given the work that you do. Now, Catherine, you've done a lot of work as an activist, particularly in areas of the environment, climate change. What was it about Western Sahara and the plight of the people that got you involved? And I'm preempting your answer. It might well be a visual answer. You've got a photograph here, which we'll tweet as well, of 3 little boys. Explain to me your involvement through the lives of these 3 little boys.
The very first time I went into the camp, we traveled by night. So I arrived into the camp around 3 a.m. in the morning, and all I could see was complete darkness and a few flickering sort of lights in the distance. I was taken to a family where I would stay for my first trip, and for those weeks that I was there, I stayed with a family who could not speak a word of English, but they were so welcoming. I was like some distant relative that they had taken in as their own. We found a way to communicate far beyond language. We were able to connect, and through my time in the camp, I met so many children. Little Mohammed is one of the children in the picture, and Mohammed is my other child. He's my Sahrawi child, and I've seen Mohammed grow up. I've seen him since he was a little infant. He was just a few months old when I met him for the first time, and he's very really attached to me. So the one thing that Sahrawis have got access to, they don't have sanitation facilities, but they have a cell phone. And Mohammed has learned how to WhatsApp call me. So,
oh, really?
He has, yes.
So there's Wi-Fi?
There's Wi-Fi in the camp that he's in Smara, but the other camps don't yet all have Wi-Fi access. Again, another intervention by Algeria. But what is important is that the children in this picture, I take this canvas with me all over the world, the children in this picture deserve better, and they do not deserve to bring up their own children in a refugee camp. There are generations of children being born into this camp with no idea that there is a world outside, and no idea that there are in fact people who must fight for them. And the same way that we relied on international solidarity, we need to do the same for forgotten people on our continent.
We spoke earlier about the pressure from the United Nations, such as it is, from the European Union, such as it is. What about the African Union? Does it get involved in this dispute at all?
So the African Union is quite involved. One has to remember that at the time of the OAU, the Western Sahara was in fact a founding member of the OAU. Morocco left the OAU because of that reason. Morocco has not been part of the African Union until February 2017, which was last year, where they were invited. Well, they weren't invited. They applied to be a part of it, and they were voted back into the African Union. This one has to really again question. If you look at the visits that the King of Morocco did 18 months prior to them getting access back into the African Union, and you see the gifts by the King of Morocco to many of the states across the continent, you will understand where their votes came from when it allowed them access back into the African Union. I do not believe the African Union is doing nearly enough to address an issue that is an African issue. But we have to then ask ourselves, who is funding the African Union? Where is majority of the funding coming from? And only when Africa actually invests in funding the African Union, will issues around Africa be the priority? We're now playing to other people's tunes and we don't even realize it.
Tell me about the campaign as we start wrapping up. The hashtag Stand in the Sand. What's this about?
This is an opportunity for ordinary people around the world, specifically here in South Africa, to get involved. It is a international solidarity campaign being launched this Friday, being Africa Day. It's an opportunity put together by Saharawi NGOs in the occupied territory and in the refugee camps, as well as international human rights defenders, activists such as myself and others who will really rally and push this campaign. The idea is that people, wherever they are, will stand in sand, take a picture, and use this hashtag to show their support for people who have been left in the sand for 42 years. And this is an opportunity for us to really highlight the issue of Western Sahara. This campaign will draw out for the next year and really focus on issues of human rights violations, the illegal imprisonment of political prisoners in Moroccan jails without fair or just cause. It will also highlight the victims of landmines, as well as the fact that a referendum must be pushed for at the UN Human Rights Council, as well as the UN Security Council, even more importantly. And it's important for us to put pressure on our leaders to also stand in the sand with these people and not just have good policy on paper, but put that policy into action.
For people who want to follow your exploits, find out more, because you're very good at using social media. Your Twitter handle is @ChangeAgent.
ChangeAgent SA.
Oh, ChangeAgent SA.
That's
Got
it.
to put that
and
on.
that's on Instagram and on Twitter. And on Facebook, I was able to use my name. It was not too long. That's Catherine Constantinides. There's a public page, and that page is dedicated to Western Sahara.
Okay. I consider myself schooled on the issue of Western Sahara.
Good.
It's been fascinating. I think I'm more horrified than fascinated, because so much of what has been wrong about Africa, the effect of colonization,
Yes.
it remains an issue in this area, and we thought we were moving past all of that.
Absolutely.
There's so much that I've learnt about Africa's last colony. Catherine, thank you so much, and stay in touch with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's an absolute pleasure. That's Catherine Constantinides. Have a look at our Twitter handle as well, our Twitter timeline at KayaFM Talk. We've posted a fair amount of video of Catherine chatting about the Western Sahara, in case you missed the earlier conversation.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned to Kaya FM for more.